Hi everyone, and happy Sunday. Welcome to Reading with Kendra. My name is Kendra, and on this channel I talk about books and bookish things, and I also vlog a little bit. So yeah, happy Sunday. And today's video we are doing my February reading wrap up, which I'm really excited about. I fell into a huge reading slump in the middle of February, so I honestly thought I would only read 1 or 2 books this month, but I ended up reading 2 other books. So I have 4 books in total. It's also quite thriller heavy. There's only 1 book on this list that isn't a thriller. So if you're not into thrillers, still stick around because you know what? Maybe this will convince you to read a thriller book. I feel like these are all really unique thrillers. They're all very different stories, which I appreciate because sometimes with romances, for example, it sometimes feels a little bit repetitive. I find with thrillers, there can also be some repetition there, but I feel like you don't run into it as much as romances. I don't know if any of you can relate, but yeah, so let's just jump right into this video. You know that I suck at intros and outros and never know when to cut myself off. So I'm going to go in order of when I read the book instead of doing like a best to worst or worst to best. So starting with the first book I read in February, which was Alice Feeney's His and Hers. So this was super fun to read because I actually watched the show before the book, and I think this was the very first thriller show or like movie I watched before reading the book, because when I was younger I used to have the thought that if I have seen the movie or show, I wouldn't read the book because I just really love like endings of books, and I felt like that if I knew what was going to happen in the end, the book wasn't worth reading. A book feels like more of a commitment, so I think when I was younger I was like, well, if I've already watched the show or movie, then like why do I need to spend an additional few hours or days reading this book? However, my opinions have changed, so I watched the show and I really liked the show. I thought after watching the show that it would be a really good book. So I also didn't know going into the show that it was a book till I think the end of the first episode. I saw Alice Feeney's name in the credits and was like, wait, that's an author. So His and Hers was basically about a husband and a wife. The husband's a cop, the wife's a journalist. Someone that they both know has been murdered, and it's basically a journey of who did it. And you kind of also go back and forth thinking that it was either the wife or the husband, or maybe it was someone from the outside. I feel like the way the book progressed, you're to believe that it's like one or the other. Maybe it's both of them, maybe it's neither. I feel like this is a super fun thriller that was done really well, and I feel like all the clues made sense. Sometimes I feel like with some thrillers they'll throw in clues and I'm like, that didn't even make sense, or like this feels so random, but I feel like everything in this book was so intentional that it made sense. And even if you were suspecting someone and that ended up not being that someone, they still did it in a way where I feel like they weren't what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I feel like they weren't just saying things to be like, oh, maybe it's this person, never mind, it's not this person. Like, everything all tied together extremely well. So the only kind of like, not I guess downside, but because I knew who the person was, when I was reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, like it's so obvious who the person is based off of these clues. But I was trying to take myself out of that and be like, okay, if I hadn't known who the person was going to be, would I have thought it was that obvious? So I think my mind was a little bit skewed. But I thought Alice Feeney's writing was so smooth. I love the way that she writes, so I'm really excited to explore more of her work. I think they stayed pretty true to the book, but there was definitely some changes that were slightly random to me. I always kind of wonder when producing a show, like how they kind of came up with these decisions. So the book was set in the UK, and then the show was set in, I'm assuming, like some small town in America. Can't remember the exact name of the place in the show. So that's just like one thing that's interesting to me. I don't know if it's just because they think like maybe the show will do better with an American cast versus like a British cast. I don't know. So I just feel like that was a change that didn't like necessarily affect the story. And then I feel like there was just some storyline changes. I actually thought that the book was way darker than the show was, which was very interesting. I actually usually feel like it's the opposite. I feel like shows or movies will kind of go for that shock value and throw in things like, for example, The Housemaid, when Millie's up in the attic. The change that they made from the book to the attic was such an interesting choice to me because I actually thought that the book one made more sense. And while obviously it was torture, the one in the movie was like so messed up that I was like, I wonder why they changed that. So anyways, overall though, I think the baseline of the story stayed true to the book, which I appreciate, and then they made little changes that I feel like worked for a show. I feel like for this book specifically, and like the show, the changes that they made didn't bother me because I feel like it worked for each version. Whereas sometimes when they change things, I kind of just wonder like why, because the book version makes a lot more sense. But this one, I feel like there was things that were changed that I was like, okay, I understand this. So overall, I really liked the book. I gave the book a 4 stars because like I said, I really liked Alice Feeney's writing. I thought the story was really interesting and something different and something that didn't feel like I've read before, which I appreciate. I liked the characters a lot in the book. I also really liked the characters in the show. And yeah, it was overall just a really good thriller. And there's definitely trigger warnings for this book, so if you're easily triggered, definitely look them up. So the second book I read was Julie Chan is Dead. I got this book for Christmas and I was so excited to dive into this book, and especially because before I read it, I heard that the story was like really crazy and really unhinged. So I was so excited to read this, and then it was so cool because in her like author's note, or in like the description about her, it said she went from like a skincare content creator to writing her first book. Like she didn't go to school for like English or journalism or any of that, which is so cool because as someone who's also in the process of writing a book who doesn't come from like a writing background, it's just really cool to see the success Leanne Zhang has had. Just a reminder, my reviews are based off of my personal thoughts. It's never really, I mean, sometimes I dive a little into the technical, but like this is just kind of my personal thoughts. So sometimes if I rate something like lower, it's not because I think it's a bad book necessarily, it just wasn't for me. I feel like early on in this story, there was a few signs that I knew that this might not be my favorite story, and the main one being, and the thing is, I knew this going into this story, so this is why I'm saying this has nothing to do with the author or the writing. I actually thought the writing was very entertaining. I just realized how much I didn't like reading a book that was so modern. So I think this might have been not one of the first, but I think most of the books I read must be before like 2010, because I feel like most books I read don't typically mention like social media and influencers and all that. So Julie Chan is Dead is basically about 2 sisters who were separated, not at birth, but like when they were very young. One sister, Chloe, ended up being adopted into like a very rich family. She ends up becoming a very successful influencer and has like millions of followers. She's extremely rich and, you know, living this influencer lifestyle. Whereas her other sister, who got adopted by actually one of their family members, their aunt, who like could care less about, oh my gosh, what's her name? Julie. So basically Julie gets adopted by their aunt, who's like not so nice and like does not give her a good upbringing. And at the beginning of the story, you know that Julie's working, I think at like a grocery store or like a supermarket, and is just really unhappy with her life. So you learn like really early on in the book that her and her sister aren't close, but a while ago, or like a couple years ago, Chloe came back into Julie's life to do this video being like, I'm buying my twin sister a house. So basically this video goes viral. I feel like Julie just doesn't really understand all of it. You could tell early on that she like wanted to be close with her sister, but her sister didn't really care. And then the only time her sister came into her life was to do this video, and it was literally for views and money, and then didn't talk to her again after. So basically the story goes, this isn't a spoiler really because this is, I feel like, what the book is about. Chloe dies, Julie discovers the body, and I feel like in a very panicked state, Julie decides to take over her sister's identity and become Chloe, which is why the book is called Julie Chan is Dead. So basically Julie dives into this whole world of influencers. I loved the premise of this story. People were saying this book was unhinged and crazy, so I was really excited to see where they were going to take it. I really liked the writing. I really liked the way the story played out. I did think it was chaotic. However, I just wish they pushed it further. And I don't want to spoil what the second half of the book is. I feel like it's more fun to discover this, not even like twist, but just this plot point in the book. Like I feel like knowing that it's coming isn't as exciting. So anyways, I feel like the second half of the book, the idea was there, but the execution of it, I think she could have even went further with it. So overall, I rated this book a 3 stars, and only because, again, personal preference. There was a few things that this author hinted at that were based off of real life influencers, but like obviously went by different names or like changed the situation a little bit. But I was able to decipher those, which made me realize how chronically online I was, which I think made me feel not great. I mean, like, I'm not ashamed to admit that I am a big social media person. I mean, I literally worked in social media my whole professional career, and I've always loved social media. It's the reason why I'm doing YouTube in the first place. I think just reading about it almost feels, I don't know if it's like dystopian for me. I don't know what it is, but reading about influencers and the influencer lifestyle almost feels like too real for me. And I feel like I read to escape. So reading things that feel so relevant to today felt weird to me. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but I think that was one thing that kind of just threw me off in the story. But aside from that, overall, I think the writing was pretty solid and the story flowed really well. I think that the first half of the book could have been cut a bit shorter, and then the second half of the book could have been lengthened out a bit more. I think the second half of the book was such a good plot change where like something big was happening in the second half of the book, but it needed to be built out more, and I feel like we wasted too much time at the beginning of the book. I think overall it's pretty fast paced, even though I'm kind of contradicting myself, even though I said I feel like the beginning dragged out. I think overall the story moved pretty fast. So it's a nice quick read, very modern. It just wasn't personally for me, but I think the book in general was a good book. I recommend you reading this. It's like, I think, a super fun read if you're into like modern thrillers. So the third book that I read was How to Break a Girl by Amanda Sung. So she actually reached out to me on Instagram. I was really excited to read this book because she basically pitched it to me as like Sex and the City, but Asian Canadian immigrants, like if the Sex and the City girls were Asian Canadian immigrants. So if you know me, I love reading a story that's set in the country I live, which is Canada, because I love being able to recognize different landmarks in stories. Also, like I mentioned at the beginning of the year, I'm trying to read more stories either like by diverse authors or like have diverse voices in stories. So I was just really excited to read this book. So How to Break a Girl was about a group of 3 best friends, and like I mentioned, just like Sex and the City, basically just about these 3 girls living their young adult lives. This book covers basically just like things that happen in young adult life, like relationships, friendships, your workplace, all that. So yeah, I thought it was a super fun read. There was definitely lots of drama in it. And overall, I gave this book a 3 stars. I think that the story was really entertaining, and I really thought that there was a lot of really good elements. I think the writing style of this book just wasn't for me, and it's funny because the author actually reached out to me while I was reading the book, and I don't know if it's because maybe she got feedback from somebody else, so maybe she was doing some, like maybe she was reaching out to some other people that she sent it to, but okay, just popping in here because I feel like as I'm editing this video, this next part didn't make sense. Like I feel like I was a little bit rambly, but basically the author had reached out to me and kind of explained her like stylistic choices of why she wrote the book the way she did. So I thought that was interesting. It kind of made more sense because I knew that the style that it was written, it was deliberate, but as I was reading it, it just like to me felt a little chaotic, but that was just a personal preference. And I appreciated her reaching out to me though to like explain that because I wasn't sure if it was a stylistic choice. I personally had never read a book like that, but in her note, like she made mention to me, she was like, you know, you might have seen this in other pieces of work. I personally hadn't, so that's why it felt so different to me, but it wasn't bad. It was just different. Anyways, okay, back to the video. I felt like the point of views changed so much. I've read many books where each chapter is different point of views, like His and Hers, for example, flip between the husband's point of view and the wife's point of view, but this one would change point of views mid-chapter. It was kind of confusing at the beginning because I feel like everyone's story kind of meshed together and I was starting to get a little confused. It wasn't like the next chapter is about this character and the next chapter is about, it was like it happened mid-chapter. So I feel like if you're just kind of reading a lot, it gets a little confusing on whose story this is a part of, especially when you're just kind of getting to know characters. Definitely also read, well, she actually has a trigger warning at the beginning of this book, so definitely look into them though, again, if you're easily triggered. Yeah, overall I give the story a 3. I think everyone's opinion on this will be situational. I don't think 3 stars are bad reads in my opinion. Like, I feel like some authors might think that they're bad reads. Like, 3 to me, the way I look at a 3-star read is that, like, overall it was like a good story. It just wasn't my favorite story, you know? Like, 5 stars are like books that I'll never forget about. 4 stars are great reads, and then 3 stars are good reads. Overall, I thought this book was good, and I think it was a really good book for, she's also, this is her debut book, so I thought it was a fabulous read. So yeah, I gave it a 3 stars. And then lastly, I read a book called Pretty Vicious by Lexi Davis, and honestly, this was kind of a random pick. I was on Goodreads trying to find more romances. I was actually looking for a sapphic romance because I'm going to read Heated Rivalry soon, and I was like, I should find a sapphic romance to read as well. Anyways, I fell down like a bunch of lists that people have made for different romances, and then I came across, I think it was like a dark academia romance category, which I was like, whoa, that sounds like it would be fun. And then I ended up finding this book on Kindle Unlimited. It was, I will say, going into the book, I was a little scared on the direction it was going to go. So basically, it's about this girl. She's delivering this pizza to a fraternity house, and she sees a dead body on the ground. So the fraternity kidnaps this girl. Off the bat, I was a little nervous because there was like a sleazy guy at the beginning. So I was scared this was going to go like you know, I was worried that the fraternity was going to abuse this girl and it was going to be like that kind of dark, which I was like, I don't think I could read a whole book where like a whole fraternity is about to abuse this like poor innocent girl. But to my surprise, this book took like a completely different turn. And so basically the fraternity is part of this higher up secret society called the Order. This fraternity sorority situation has been going on for like hundreds of years. And basically you learn all about the Order and like what it means. So you learn quickly that the leader of the fraternity is kind of the one pulling the strings, but he basically kidnaps this girl to protect her in a sense, because he knows that like what she saw that night, if she runs away, will get murdered. So there's a lot that goes into it. I don't want to give away everything, but it's a dark romance. Basically the person that's like the leader of the fraternity and her become bonded together, which you learned what that means in the book pretty early on. And it's basically their like love story, which sounds crazy because she gets kidnapped by a bunch of fraternity boys. But honestly, I will say the way the book played out, best way I could describe this book is like, it's a fraternity and a sorority that has elements of the Hunger Games and Squid Games in it. So do with that what you will. Is that the saying? I feel like the lore behind the Order, like the secret society, gives very Hunger Games and very Squid Games combined as one, which made it so much more interesting to me. And there's definitely dark elements to the book, so read trigger warnings. And it was, I feel like this was technically the first book I've read in like the dark romance category. So I would love to explore some more dark romances and see like how creative people get. I feel like dark romances can go either way, so it'll be interesting to see different versions of dark romances. But overall, I thought the story was very entertaining. It hooked me pretty early on. I really enjoyed most of the characters. I will say the female character kind of started to irk me a little bit. I don't know what it is with the authors I read. I find a lot of times authors write these female characters as almost kind of stupid in situations, which always bothers me because I feel like a lot of times in books at the beginning, they will talk about how our like female main character is supposed to be this like brilliant person, super smart. And then when like shit hits the fan, they make like really dumb decisions, and I'm always like, well, I thought this person's supposed to have a 4.0 GPA, or now they're making dumb decisions. They always dumb down these female characters, and it bothers me so much. I feel like I want to see a good representation of like a strong female in these situations, and maybe I'm just reading books where like the female is like the submissive person where they're always going to be a little less dominant. So I don't know, maybe I just need to explore more books. But overall, I think Pretty Vicious was a solid read. I just finished it last night, so I haven't actually decided what I wanted to rate it. It's going to be between like a 3.75 and 4. But overall, I mean, I was very thoroughly entertained by the story. So I hope you enjoyed my February wrap up. Let me know if you've read any of these books, or let me know if any of these books interest you, and I can't wait to talk about these books with you. And I'm excited to see what's in store for March. I do have Heated Rivalry lined up to read, as well as I want to read Twilight this spring, but we still have a bunch of snow. I'm waiting for rainy season. And yeah, there's a couple of other physical books I want to read. There's a lot of Kindle books I want to read. I feel like one of the reasons why I fell into a reading slump is because I'm in that stage right now where I have so many books I want to read that I spend so much time trying to decide what book I want to read that I end up getting overwhelmed and then just not reading at all. Can anyone else relate? This happens to me with movies too, where sometimes I'm in the mood to watch a movie and I have so many movies like on my watch list that I end up just either rewatching a movie that I've seen, which like I'll watch a comfort film or like a show. So I don't know if anyone else can relate to that, but I just get overwhelmed by the options. So I end up just crashing out basically and not even reading at all. Yeah, see, I'm rambling again. Anyways, I will see you next Sunday. Bye everyone.